Hello, well, we're going to look at this question. So, evaluate sociological explanations. As soon as I see explanations, it tells me it is a usefulness word. So, if it's a usefulness question or it wants you to use the usefulness section of your grid, it will say explanations or it will say contributions, reasons, or theories. Okay. Sometimes it will say usefulness. So it's really clearly saying, right, can you tell us the usefulness of each of the paragraphs? Other times it uses this language to just, see if you understand. Because it's got the word explanations, it tells me it's a usefulness. The difference between a usefulness is the paragraphs go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 down the page. So you do 6 one after the other, and you're basically regurgitating the grid. When it's a debate, you do it 6 paragraphs, but you do it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It goes yes, no, paragraph, yes, no, yes, no. And the paragraphs go in here and they go for or against the question. When it's a debate and they want you to structure it like this, they use the word view, may, extent, or they give you a statement. Assess the view that class inequality is caused by outside school factors. Or they say class inequality is caused by outside school factors. This often ends with discuss. Okay, it's got the word explanations, so it tells me it's a usefulness question. And it says class inequality in education. So it's telling me I need to do a usefulness on the blue class inequality in education grid. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is in the introduction. And in the introduction, I'm going to outline the stat. So in the introduction, 21% of free school meals children achieve a 5 in both English and maths. The average is 46%. Okay. There have been useful sociological explanations. I need to address the question. There have been useful sociological explanations that have considered the impacts of poverty, parental involvement, and labelling. However, they fail to see or fail to connect any discussion of ethnicity or gender. Okay, my intro. And in the intro, we outline the stat. Okay, paragraph 1. We need to address the question in the start. A useful sociological explanation. A useful sociological explanation is material deprivation. Material deprivation describes the impacts of poverty. Material deprivation describes the impacts of poverty. Smith and Noble note that poor quality housing. So Smith knows that poor quality housing can lead to higher rates of sickness. Poor diet can lead to lower rates of concentration, and a lack of money for resources, books and the internet. For Forsyth and Furlong, the most significant factor deterring the working class from university is the cost. So just basically regurgitating the knowledge in the paragraph. And catchment area, the area that schools draw their pupils. In socially deprived areas, there's a higher turnover of teachers. So that's all the knowledge. That's all AO1, all knowledge. Okay. Then we address the question, we do AO2. This shows, we always shows we're doing AO2 with this shows. This shows material deprivation, and we address the question, is a useful sociological explanation, as it considers that poverty causes students to miss content needed for exams. It's poverty that causes students to miss content needed for exams and lowers concentration in lessons. This is what causes class inequality. It's useful. It considers that's why there's lower attendance and lower concentration, AO2. However, take the however from the grid. This is AO3. However, our Bangladeshi community statistically experience the worst rate of poverty and actually outperform white British at 49%. Our Bangladeshi community statistically outperform white British students. This suggests material deprivation. Material deprivation cannot be the only explanation for class inequality. A-grade students do a tiny little link back to the terms of the question in the however. Okay, tiny little link back each time. That's paragraph 1. Okay. Paragraph 2. An alternative explanation for, let's check the question, class inequality in education is parental involvement. I'm doing the bigger paragraphs, the ones that have the most names in case I run out of time. Okay. Douglas claimed that parental support, or involvement was the most important factor. Phillips and Palmer argue middle-class parents are more child-centred and can actually socially control their children. And for Saunders, middle-class children or middle class are just more intelligent, hardworking, and better motivated. Okay, 3 sociologists really short. Feel free to pause me if I am going slightly too speedy for you. Okay, the end of that paragraph. That's all AO1. AO2, this shows, you're not doing this analysis unless you do, this shows parental involvement is a useful sociological explanation of class inequality. This shows parental involvement is a useful sociological explanation of class inequality. Of class inequality. It considers that parents are a positive resource. They can encourage children to complete homework and revision, making an impact or making a positive impact on results. Students who do all their homework and do revision are much more likely to achieve. And if parents can make their children do that, that will have a positive impact. Okay, that's AO2. However, AO3. However, so I'm taking the evaluation. However, Keddy angrily rejects this view. Working class parenting is not inferior. Working class parenting is not inferior and is not the explanation of class inequality in education. So we remember an A-star student comes back, angrily rejects this view, working class parenting is not inferior. These explanations do not explain class inequality in education. Okay, that's paragraph 2. Knowledge, 3 names. This shows, however, and the however comes back to the term of the question. Paragraph 3. Try not to list. Okay, I know you're regurgitating the grid. You know you're regurgitating the grid, but an A grade student doesn't go another at the start of the paragraph. So paragraph 3. Cultural differences. Cultural differences are a useful explanation of class inequality. See how you keep hearing me say the exact same terms of the question? That's very important. For Bourdieu, middle class students have cultural capital. They have a cultural advantage. Middle class students have cultural capital. They have a cultural advantage. Working class students experience symbolic violence. Working class students experience symbolic violence, where their culture is devalued in education. And habitus is the expectations of your social group. They can encourage or discourage education. Okay. Goetz. Professor Goetz is a she. Goetz argue middle class are privileged skill choosers. Middle class are privileged skill choosers as they have both economic and cultural capital. And for Sugarman, working class groups have cultural barriers. Working class groups have cultural barriers to education. Fatalism and they seek immediate gratification and are present time orientated. So I'm reducing these people's careers to two-liners, but your time is quite limited. So that's all knowledge. This shows. By this point, people will come away from the question. So read the question every time you do the this shows. This shows cultural differences are a useful sociological explanation of class inequality. This shows cultural explanations are a useful sociological explanation of class inequality as they consider that culture can encourage educational participation. Basically the habitus. A culture can encourage educational participation, and that working class groups might not engage in lessons if they have experienced symbolic violence. Teachers tutted or scoffed at norms or values or language. I wouldn't engage with a teacher who was rude to me either. However, Keddy, 2 seconds. Not Keddy, however, Lynch. There we go. However Lynch argues these cultural explanations, Lynch argues that these cultural explanations are not accurate. He argues they're not accurate. Material deprivation or poverty is what causes class inequality. He doesn't agree with them. It's poverty that causes class inequality in education. So again, we're trying to come back to the question because we want an A star. All right. Okay. That is paragraph 3. And just so you know, I've selected these paragraphs first. It doesn't matter what order you do them in, but I would recommend doing the sections of the grid that have the most names. 4 paragraphs with 3 sociologists in per paragraph would still put you over to band 1. 3 paragraphs, or 4, with 1 name per paragraph is not good. It doesn't give range, okay? So paragraph 4. Labelling is also a paragraph with loads of sociologists in it. So labelling is a useful explanation, question of class inequality in education. Becker studied 60 teachers and found they have an ideal type who is most likely to be middle class. Working class groups are labelled, placed into bottom set, where they internalise or accept failure and thus self-fulfilling the prophecy. For Ball, schools still set and stream to please middle class parents who don't want their children, who seek to protect their children from weaker or disruptive students. For Ray, children, so Ray views setting and streaming negatively. Remember, she's a professor at Cambridge, comes from a working class background. Just try not to misgender particularly very famous female professors. I'm sure your examiners are feminists and also they're famous. It suggests that you probably aren't that clued up on all your sociologists. So Ray views setting and streaming negatively. He sees that children as young as 10 have already internalized. Remember, she interviews Sharon, so she's not very bright. She's 10. Okay, 3 sociologists. Could put Hargreaves in. But yeah, this shows labelling. So why you have in your grid little headings on the far left-hand side that say labelling or parental involvement or cultural, it means that you can be clear about what the theme is. So this shows labelling is a useful sociological explanation to explain class inequality. As they consider that setting physically limits the grades of learners, that setting physically limits the grades of learners, and this can cause internalization. So students give up and no longer try. They fail because they give up and they no longer try. But they wouldn't have given up and internalised if maybe they weren't labelled and then popped into bottom set where their grades are capped, is the argument. However, for Blackman, this sociological explanation is not entirely useful. It's not an entirely useful explanation, as they cannot explain why Black Afro-Caribbean girls are labelled, placed into bottom set, but never internalise. Ethnicity is missing from this explanation because it's what we call ethnocentric. It's focused on one ethnic group, so white working class. Because they don't look at any other groups of colour, they cannot fully explain a connection between ethnicity and class. Why are your Bangladeshi community outperforming white British, even when statistically they experience one of the worst rates of poverty as a community? Because there's a neglection of ethnicity, it doesn't fully explain things. Okay, so time. Could do the last one, which is language. Language is a useful sociological explanation. Bernstein, elaborate and restricted language codes. So this will be quite short and sweet in the exam. This shows language is a useful sociological explanation as it considers students can't achieve if they struggle to understand teachers, textbooks, and exam questions. So Bernstein, elaborate and restrictive language codes. However, for Laboff, working class speech codes are just as complex. And I'm just going to steal from ethnicity. And Gilborn and Mirza note that Chinese and Indian students outperform white British even when English is not their first language. Remember, still British, still likely born on British soil or have British citizens. So we're born here, so are British. But the first language they ever heard as children might not have been English because they might be bilingual, so have two languages fluently. But it can't be language if students who the first language they were ever taught from, I don't know, 0 to 1 is a different language and they're still outperforming white British. But remember, people are still British. If they're born on British soil or have British citizenship. Okay. So, conclusion. So, what are the most useful ones? What are the best ones? Sociological explanations. So, useful sociological explanations of class inequality is material deprivation. I think material deprivation is a really good one. It considers attendance issues and concentration. So definitely think poverty has an issue with attendance and concentration. Labelling caps the grades of students and is why learners may no longer try or engage at all. This is my sociological view. I think of all of the paragraphs in that grid, those two are the most useful. I really do. Cultural, I get it can push you and encourage you, but I think nothing limits more like poverty. So that's just my sociological view. You pick the most compelling ones without saying I. However, all of these explanations, neglect ethnicity, and therefore their usefulness needs to be questioned. My evaluation for both of those paragraphs is, well, when we look at different ethnic groups, it doesn't stand up. Therefore, their usefulness is limited. Can't just look at white working class and expect to explain everything. So 35 marker, usefulness question, which you haven't seen yet. So before we go, I just need you to note the following thing, okay? So AO1 for a 35 marker is worth 12 marks. So at 35 marks available to you, AO1 or knowledge is worth 12. AO2, which is your this shows and addressing the question, is worth 11 marks. Okay, so it's worth nearly the same amount of marks, which is why you have to keep referencing at the start and you must keep using the terms of the question. AO3, which is your however, this is also worth 12. Okay, it's evenly split. Names, this shows, however, which is why you'll see this much of the text is AO1, is knowledge. This much of the text is AO2, this shows, and it's definitely addressing the question. And this much of the text is however, or AO3. It's pretty, as I go through, evenly split. AO1, knowledge. As soon as I see this shows, and it's definitely the terms of the question, it goes AO2, AO3. It's evenly split near on because the marks are evenly split. So if you produce an essay with no this shows or no however, the maximum you could get would be 12 out of 35, which means you wouldn't actually pass. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Thank you very much for your time, folks.